The afternoon sun transformed the luxury hotel's glass facade into a blazing mirror, reflecting the elegant chaos of wealth gathering in one place. Black sedans lined the circular drive like predatory birds, their engines purring with quiet power. Among them sat a pristine limousine, its leather interior soft as silk, its engine a whispered promise of comfort. Behind the wheel, Marcus adjusted his white gloves and straightened his already perfect tie. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed calm brown eyes, a face unmarked by the bitterness that might have lived there, and the kind of stillness that comes from years of watching the world without letting it see you watching back. The rear door opened with the soft click of expensive engineering, and Cole Harrington emerged like a man stepping onto his own stage. Everything about him gleamed, the Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars, the gold Rolex that caught light like a signal flare, the practiced smile that had graced magazine covers and boardroom conquests. In his manicured hand, a crystal glass of Bordeaux swayed gently, defying Marcus's earlier suggestion that perhaps wine and leather seats were natural enemies. Cole's foot found the curb's edge at precisely the wrong angle. Physics claimed its due. The wine arced through the air in a crimson spray, christening the pale leather with dark stains that spread like accusations across the pristine interior. Time suspended itself for one crystalline moment. Then Cole's face ignited with the kind of rage that money usually shields from public view. He wheeled toward Marcus with the fury of a king discovering peasants in his throne room. "You worthless piece of," the words exploded from him, cutting through the hotel's refined atmosphere like a blade through silk. "Do you have any concept of what this interior cost? Any idea who you're dealing with?" A crowd materialized as crowds do when power reveals its ugly face in public, curious, uncomfortable, but ultimately passive. Hotel staff froze in doorways like deer sensing predators. Valet attendants found sudden interest in their shoes. Marcus stepped out slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. He surveyed the damage with the clinical detachment of a man who had learned long ago that reacting to injustice only multiplies it. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of patience earned through suffering, "perhaps we can." "Don't." Cole's finger jabbed the air between them like a weapon. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. You hit a pothole, you braked too hard, you exist, I don't care. This is your responsibility." The words hung in the air, ugly and naked. Marcus felt them settle on his shoulders like stones, adding to a collection he'd been carrying for most of his life. His hands remained steady at his sides, though something flickered behind his calm exterior, not anger, but something deeper. Something that had been building for decades. "I'll arrange for professional cleaning," Marcus offered quietly. Cole's laughter was sharp enough to cut glass. "With what? Your tip money? Listen carefully. I could destroy your entire life with one phone call. One conversation with your boss, and you're back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved. No one spoke. They were witnesses to a crucifixion of dignity, and their silence made them accomplices. "People like you," Cole continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow carried to every ear present, "you're disposable. Replaceable. There are 1,000 men who could do your job better, and they're all waiting for you to mess up exactly like this." Marcus absorbed the words like earth absorbing rain, completely, without resistance. His face remained a mask of professional composure, but behind his eyes, something ancient and powerful stirred. Not rage. Not hatred. Something far more dangerous, understanding. The crowd saw what they expected to see, a uniformed driver accepting his place in the world's hierarchy. They saw submission, defeat, the natural order of things reasserting itself. What they missed was the transformation happening in the spaces between Cole's words, in the silence that followed each insult, in the way Marcus's stillness became something else entirely. Not weakness, but preparation. None of them knew where Marcus Reed had come from. None of them understood what he carried. Marcus's childhood home had been a symphony of broken things, pipes that leaked rusty water, windows that wouldn't quite close, dreams that couldn't quite take flight. His mother, Sarah, worked days at a hospital laundry and nights cleaning office buildings, her hands cracked from industrial detergent, her spirit somehow unbroken despite carrying burdens that would have crushed weaker souls. His father, David, had been a gentle giant who fixed bicycles and small engines in their garage, teaching Marcus that everything broken could be made whole again with enough patience and the right tools. When Marcus was 9, David was shot dead during a convenience store robbery, not as the perpetrator, not as the hero, but as a man who happened to be buying milk when violence decided to visit his Tuesday evening. The funeral was sparsely attended. The bills that followed were not. Sarah's illness arrived like winter, slowly at first, then all at once. Cancer moved through her body with the methodical thoroughness of an accountant, claiming piece after piece while Marcus watched helplessly from hospital waiting rooms that smelled of disinfectant and despair. By 16, Marcus was working construction after school, his hands learning the weight of honest labor while his mind absorbed every book he could steal moments to read. By 18, he was alone in a world that had never promised him anything and had delivered exactly what it promised. College was a luxury for other people's children. But education, real education, couldn't be locked behind tuition walls. Marcus educated himself in the spaces between exhaustion, learning business theory while loading trucks, studying investment strategies during breaks at the warehouse, absorbing economic principles like a plant absorbing sunlight. His first investment was $37, everything he had left after rent and ramen noodles. He lost it immediately. His second investment was $43. Lost again. The third time, something clicked. Not the money, that disappeared too. But the understanding. The pattern. The rhythm of markets that spoke to something deep in his mathematical mind. Years flowed past like water finding its level. Small gains became larger ones. Larger ones became substantial ones. Failures became lessons. Lessons became wisdom. Wisdom became power. But Marcus never changed addresses. Never bought the sports car. Never dated the socialite. Power without humility was just another form of poverty, and he'd seen enough of that to last several lifetimes. Driving became his meditation, his escape, his way of staying connected to the man he'd been before money changed everything it touched. Behind the wheel, he could think clearly, move freely, exist without the weight of other people's expectations or assumptions. The world assumed Marcus Reed was exactly what he appeared to be, a driver, a worker, a man whose dreams were small enough to fit in a uniform pocket. And Marcus never corrected them. Not from shame, but from strategy. Invisibility was the greatest superpower ever discovered, and he wielded it with the precision of a master craftsman. Cole Harrington's empire had been built on other people's assumptions too, though his were entirely different. To the world, Cole was success incarnate, magazine covers, speaking engagements, business school case studies. He'd started with his grandfather's textile fortune and transformed it into a global investment powerhouse through what the financial press called aggressive innovation and what his employees called systematic cruelty. Cole had learned early that fear was more reliable than respect, that humiliation was more effective than motivation. His boardrooms were theaters of psychological warfare where careers died quick deaths and dignity was a luxury no one could afford. He treated service workers like furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. Servers, drivers, cleaners, doormen, they existed in his peripheral vision as functions rather than humans. He tipped just enough to avoid scandal and just little enough to ensure they understood their place in his universe. His wealth was his weapon, his status his shield. In Cole's mind, money didn't just buy things, it bought the right to look down on anyone who had less. And since he had more than almost everyone, he spent most of his time looking down. The spilled wine wasn't about interior damage. It was about control. About maintaining the cosmic order that placed Cole Harrington at the center of everything that mattered. When a driver, caused him even momentary inconvenience, it was an assault on the very foundation of how the world was supposed to work. As Cole strode toward the hotel entrance that evening, still hurling insults over his shoulder like a child throwing stones, he had no idea that he'd just humiliated one of the wealthiest men in America. He'd mistaken silence for submission, humility for weakness, invisibility for insignificance. That mistake was about to destroy everything he thought he knew about the world. The auction house gleamed like a cathedral of commerce, its marble floors reflecting the soft golden light that made everything appear touched by Midas himself. The city's elite moved through the space with the practiced grace of people who'd learned to treat enormous wealth as a casual accessory. Cole arrived fashionably punctual, his confidence restored and amplified by familiar surroundings. Heads turned as he entered, some in recognition, others in aspiration. He accepted their attention like a king receiving tribute, already mentally cataloging which conversations would advance his interests and which people he could safely ignore. Marcus entered minutes later, virtually invisible as he escorted an elderly client to the registration desk. His passenger was a quiet art collector who preferred anonymity to attention, the kind of old money that whispered while new money shouted. Cole's eyes tracked Marcus across the lobby like a predator watching wounded prey. "Look what wandered in," Cole announced loudly to his small circle of associates. "Security must be getting lazy. Next thing you know, they'll let anyone with a uniform bid on a Picasso." The laughter that followed was nervous and performative, the kind of sound wealthy people make when they're not sure whether cruelty is fashionable at this particular moment. Marcus continued walking without acknowledging the comment, his pace unhurried, his expression unchanged. But several people noticed the quality of his stillness, not submission, but something else. Something that made a few of them remember other times when quiet men had surprised loud ones. The auction hall itself was a temple to human desire, filled with objects that represented centuries of artistic achievement and decades of accumulated wealth. Each item under glass carried a price tag that could fund small countries or destroy large fortunes, depending on how the evening unfolded. Cole settled into his front row seat like he was claiming a throne. Marcus took his place among the drivers and staff near the side wall, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward, invisible again. The first lot appeared under the spotlights like a jewel emerging from darkness, a Renaissance painting that had hung in private collections for 4 centuries, never seen by public eyes, never photographed for art history books. The kind of masterpiece that made collectors abandon reason and embrace obsession. Cole's hand shot up before the auctioneer finished describing the piece. "2 million, he declared with theatrical confidence, his voice carrying across the hushed hall like a challenge to anyone brave enough to compete with him. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Opening with such an aggressive bid was either brilliant strategy or dangerous arrogance, and no one was quite sure which they were witnessing. The auctioneer nodded professionally. 2 million from bidder 12. Do I hear? A soft electronic chime interrupted him. The large screen at the front of the hall illuminated with simple text, "Remote bidder active." 3.5 million, came a calm voice through the speaker system. The room shifted. Remote bidding wasn't unusual, but something about the voice, its certainty, its lack of hesitation, made people pay attention in a way they hadn't expected to. Cole's smile widened. Anonymous competition was exactly what he needed to demonstrate his dominance properly. 5 million, he announced, turning slightly to ensure his profile was visible to the maximum number of admirers. The electronic chime sounded again, almost immediately. 8 million. A few gasps escaped from the audience. The bidding had escalated beyond casual territory in less than 30 seconds. This was serious money moving at serious speed. Cole felt the first flutter of something that wasn't quite concern but wasn't comfort either. Still, he pressed forward. 10 million. The pause that followed stretched longer than the previous ones. Cole used the silence to scan the room, basking in the attention, mentally composing the story he'd tell at tomorrow's business lunch about the anonymous coward who'd challenged him and lost. 15 million. The voice returned with the same unhurried tone, as if the speaker were ordering coffee rather than spending enough money to buy a small hotel. Cole's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. 18 million. 25 million. The room erupted in whispers. 25 million for the opening lot was unprecedented, even in circles where unprecedented was the baseline expectation. Cole glanced around, suddenly aware that he'd become the center of attention in a way he hadn't anticipated. Every eye in the room was bouncing between him and the mysterious screen, waiting to see who would blink first. 30 million, he declared, his voice carrying a slight edge now. The electronic chime responded faster this time, as if the remote bidder had been waiting for him to finish. 50 million. Silence crashed over the hall like a wave. 50 million wasn't just expensive, it was statement money. The kind of bid that announced the presence of serious power. Cole felt sweat gather at his collar despite the perfect climate control. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around him, conversations had stopped entirely. Everyone was watching now, not just curious but genuinely riveted. The auctioneer cleared his throat carefully. 50 million from our remote bidder. Do I hear? 55, Cole said quickly, his voice slightly higher than before. 75 million. The number landed like a physical blow. Several people in the front rows turned completely around to look at the screen, as if they could somehow see through the technology to identify this invisible force that was casually throwing around the GDP of small nations. Cole's paddle trembled slightly in his hand. 75 million was approaching the limit of what even he could justify spending on a single piece, no matter how historically significant. But surrender wasn't an option. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not when his entire reputation was built on being the man who always won. 80 million, he forced out. The pause that followed felt different. Longer. Heavier. For a moment, Cole allowed himself to believe he'd finally pushed the anonymous bidder beyond their breaking point. 125 million. The sound that rose from the audience wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a roar. It was something else entirely, the noise that money makes when it moves in quantities that reshape reality. Cole's face went white. His hand fell to his lap, the paddle forgotten. 125 million for a single painting was beyond aggressive bidding. It was a declaration of war. The auctioneer's voice cracked slightly. 125 million. Going once, going twice. Cole said nothing. Could say nothing. The number had pushed him beyond the edge of rational decision-making into territory where only the truly fearless or the truly foolish dared to venture. Sold. $125 million. The hammer fell with the finality of a closing door. As the applause began, uncertain, scattered, more shocked than celebratory, Cole forced his professional smile back into place. But something had changed in the room's dynamic. The invisible bidder hadn't just won an auction, they'd announced their presence in a way that made everyone recalculate what they thought they knew about the evening's power structure. From his position near the wall, Marcus watched the proceedings with the same calm attention he'd maintained all night. If anyone had been looking closely, which no one was, they might have noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible shift in his posture. But no one was looking at the driver. All eyes remained fixed on the mystery unfolding at the front of the room, where an invisible force was rewriting the rules of engagement with surgical precision. The second lot appeared under the lights, and the pattern repeated itself with mathematical inevitability. Cole would bid aggressively. The remote bidder would counter with overwhelming force. The room would collectively hold its breath as numbers climbed beyond reason into the realm of pure financial theater. By the fourth lot, Cole's confident banter had disappeared entirely. By the sixth, his face had settled into a mask of barely controlled frustration. By the eighth, people had stopped looking at him with admiration and started looking at him with something dangerously close to pity. The mysterious remote bidder was systematically dismantling Cole Harrington's carefully constructed image of financial supremacy, and they were doing it with the casual efficiency of someone swatting flies. But the evening's real drama was still waiting in the wings, gathering momentum like a storm system moving across a clear sky. The final lot hadn't appeared yet, and when it did, the collision between Cole's ego and the remote bidder's resources would reshape more than just auction records. It would reveal the difference between having money and being powerful, between commanding attention and earning respect, between thinking you're untouchable and discovering that someone else has been watching you all along, waiting for exactly the right moment to demonstrate what real power actually looks like. In the growing tension of that auction hall, with hundreds of the world's wealthiest people watching nervously as their assumptions crumbled around them, Marcus Reed continued to stand quietly near the wall, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unchanged. But behind his calm exterior, decades of patience were finally approaching their conclusion.